Welcome, coaches. We will get into it. Firstly, thanks for joining us. We know it's a public holiday, but very lucky to have Jess and Corey willing to give up their time, and hopefully a few more jump on and join us throughout. And if not, they'll watch back later, and we'll have this as a great resource. Two great topics, both different, but both very important for coaches of all levels, but particularly domestic coaches. First up is Jessica Scannell. Jess is a player with our Big V Champ Women team, but also wears many other hats in a coaching sense, work sense, and has a lot of experience. So she's going to present on inclusive coaching. So I'll pass over to you, Jess.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Reece. Thanks very much for having me here. And thanks to everyone as well for joining tonight. Again, I know it's a public holiday, so really appreciate everyone coming to listen. And I just think as well, given the climate at the moment, I think inclusive coaching is a really important topic. So it's great that we're all able to chat about it. I'm just going to try to share my screen. Just bear with me. Share screen. And I just have a little PowerPoint presentation put together for you guys. Reece, just jump in and tell me if this looks right. Slideshow, I guess?
Yeah.
All good?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So yeah, just before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you guys tonight from Bunwarong country, up a little bit closer to Melbourne than you are. And I just want to also acknowledge that we all meet and play basketball and share our love of the game on Wathaurong country. Both of these tribes form part of the Kulin Nation. And I just want to pay my respects to Kulin elders past, present and emerging. I think it's really important to do that as an immigrant to this country, especially as a guest on this land, just to acknowledge, the long history, the oldest continuous culture on earth that we're so lucky to be a part of here in Australia. And I think that you can't really begin to talk about inclusive coaching until you talk about the inclusion of Aboriginal Australia in society and in sport in general. So just wanted to start with that. Now let's see if we can skip. All right. So I don't want to get, too heavy tonight, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that sport in this country was created by wealthy white men for wealthy white men, and clubs have historically been constructed to cater to this cohort. So as we all know, society has changed. Sport has changed a lot in the last 250 years in this country. And I think we all recognize that participation in sport really is a human right, and that we have to change our clubs and our sport to be a true reflection of our society. And I think we're doing that. I think at Werribee, especially, I see it as a very inclusive club, but it's important to talk about those who have been traditionally excluded from sport. So basically it's everyone who's not in that first group that we talked about: women, Indigenous Australians, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, members of the LGBT community, people living with disabilities, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I really think the main way to change that is for inclusion to become who we are, not just something that we do. So instead of just running a program for one particular group, how do we make sure that our whole club is reflective of our society? So bringing in more people, I guess, from non-traditional sporting backgrounds to be the decision makers in the club, and to be a voice when decisions are made about them. So I was going to talk a lot tonight about people living with disability, and how we can really work to include them in our sessions, because I think that's a really practical thing that especially domestic coaches can use just to make our club a better place. But I just think it's really important, given the climate of everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, and racial injustice is really being brought to the forefront at the moment, which is really good and really important. I just want to talk a little bit about this quote here from Nelson Mandela, and I think it's so true even today that sport really does have the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire, to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they can understand. Sport can create hope where there was once only despair. It's more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers, and it lasts in the face of all discrimination. Sport is the game of lovers. So that's a really nice quote, but I really believe that this is only true if we as a club, if all of us really believe it, and we try to live it every day. And just to, I guess, to touch on everything that's going on at the moment, you know, protesting is a great way to speak out about a problem. And obviously I fully support that. But I think for real systemic change to occur, we have to change, I guess, our own culture and our hearts and minds. And we have to look at like practical ways of really trying to include people. So, you know, hundreds of years of systemic oppression isn't going to change overnight. We all need to make small changes. But I think the most important thing is to have a will to make that happen. So I guess just to talk about Windham, you know, Windham is one of the most diverse local government areas in Melbourne. I think it's like 41% of all residents of Windham are born overseas. So I think that we have a duty to make our club be more reflective of the people that live in our area. So like some small little, I guess, ways we can overcome those barriers is just really actively trying to reach out and help people where if a barrier doesn't exist for you, like for example, if your kids are playing, you know, rep basketball and it's easy for you to drive to the game, and that's something that, you know, your family has always done, just maybe having a little think about, you know, it might not be so easy for people who are new to the country, especially if they're on from a lower socioeconomic background. They may not have an extra car. They may not be able to leave perhaps smaller kids at home. So just something as simple as offering to give people a lift to a game to break down that barrier so they can play. A small change like that, you know, really goes a long way. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly. Yeah, so inclusive coaching. For me, inclusive coaching is simply good coaching. Best practice youth coaching is inclusive coaching. And it's just trying to create an environment where everyone from all backgrounds and all abilities have an opportunity to develop and belong. It can't just be a tick box mentality. I think the most important thing to become an inclusive club and an inclusive coach is to have the will, to have a desire to make sure that everyone is welcome and included in your session that you're running. And it might sound a bit idealistic, but I really believe that if we do that, we are going to build a better environment for everyone, and we will build a better world. So I guess to really get into the practicalities of what is inclusive coaching, you have to think about what is your purpose as a junior basketball coach. Your purpose must be individual skill development. It has to be the development of each unique person's love, enjoyment, and understanding of the game, to develop their skills to the best of their own ability. That's it. If you have an elite sort of competitive mindset, then you probably don't want to be coaching junior participation-based basketball. You really need to be an athlete-centered coach, and you want to put the athlete that you're coaching at the center of everything that you're doing. Two ways to do that is to use person-centered strengths-based language. So it's kind of hard, I think, to describe what those two things are, but it's really easy to describe what they're not. Just, I guess, to give a bit of a focus on tonight, I'm just going to talk a bit about disability and people with different abilities and how we can really try to include them in our sessions. And the first thing is being person-centered. So to give an example, we need to speak to people with disability like we speak to everybody else. I've seen some examples of where people with disability are engaging in sport, and quite often they'll have a support person with them, and you'll see a coach or someone running the gym they'll speak directly to the support person and not directly to the actual athlete. So I think it's just making that really little flip of a switch in your mind that you want to speak directly to the person and ask them what they need and how they can be, how you can help them to be involved. And then, of course, if there's a misunderstanding, you can ask for clarification and you can ask for support from the support person, but that should never be your first point of call. It should be the person directly that you're trying to help. Strengths-based language is also really important. Again, it's hard to really describe exactly what it is, but it's easy to describe what it's not. And this is true for all coaching. I've experienced watching people coaching kids how to do layups, for example, and every time the 7-year-old will go and try to take a layup, the coach will say, that's terrible, you missed, disgraceful. Like, we don't need to use language like that at all with kids. So just trying to use positive language, whether they make or miss the layup, if they take the right steps or they use the right hand, you should always be able to find something to praise. So I think that's really key. Just looking at this pyramid here, this is sort of like a traditional model of a sports club, working up from grassroots participation to elite competition. That's a very traditional model, and the reason I have these question marks in the middle is just to say, like, what actually happens in between here. I think that yes, we need to have a lot of people being involved, and there should always be a pathway to elite competition, but there's so much more that happens in the middle here in between. And there's your social connection, your mental well-being, and your sense of purpose, your sense of community. All of those things are just as, if not more important than being on a pathway to elite competition. And most people who start out at grassroots sport won't become elite professional athletes, but that doesn't mean that sport isn't like significantly important to their lives. And it's the same for all people who have been traditionally excluded, whether you're from a culturally and linguistically diverse background or you have a disability. It's just really important to remember that there's more purpose to sport than just elite competition. So I just want to speak briefly about diversity within disability. If you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. So no two people with a disability are alike. Traditional, I guess, methods that we would use to quote unquote try to help people with disability. If you look at the top here, exclusion and separation, this is, I guess, how it was done sort of 40, 50 years ago. And we've seen that it really doesn't help people. It really limits people, and it creates a real sort of taboo around the whole sector. But looking at where we've moved towards integration and inclusion, this is really what we want to focus on. So there is a difference between integration and inclusion. Integration is, I guess, when people have their own session with their peers that really is at their level and meets their needs. And that's really important. I think that the All Abilities Basketball Club at Werribee and also our wheelchair basketball program do an amazing job at that. And I think the key with this is that the individual who is trying to get involved with sport needs to have that choice. So for some people, an integrated model with a dedicated All Abilities program will be really beneficial, and it's what they will enjoy. But for other people who may have, more mild needs, inclusion should definitely be an option for them if that's something that they want to do. If they want to be included in a mainstream domestic session, we should give them every opportunity to do that. And if they need more help, then an all ability session could also be an option for them. But it's basically giving people choice, right? Giving people choice for what works best for them. So I wouldn't say that integration or inclusion, one is better or worse. It just depends on what's going to meet the needs of that individual person the most. So just to talk a little bit about disability in sport, I'm not going to go through every single point here, but it's important to note that 4.3 million Australians have some level of disability. That's around 18% of the population. Between 1 in 40 and 1 in 60, there's a lot of different numbers out there, children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and over 700,000 people have an intellectual disability in Australia. So I'm going to focus a little bit on autism and intellectual disability, because the chances are, if you are coaching junior sport, you're probably going to end up coaching someone on the autism spectrum or someone with an intellectual disability. And I really believe that we have a duty to make sure that when we do that, it's a positive experience for those people. And the key really is to change our expectations, to ask and to listen. You don't need to be an expert in disability to coach someone with a disability, but you do need to understand person-centered coaching. So for example, just to give a personal example, as Reece mentioned, I do a bit of coaching. I coach skill development sessions, and we had a boy with autism come and join in the session, and this is, I guess, when I really first started getting involved with this type of coaching, and I was a bit I guess disappointed at the end of the session, because the boy only participated in the warm-up and some of the ball handling drills, and then the small-sided games and the more competitive side of the session was bit overwhelming, so he didn't participate in the rest of the session. And I went and spoke to the mom and the boy afterwards, and I was sort of like very I guess apologetic and just wanting to do more and help him to be more confident to continue to be involved. And I was coming into the situation with that sort of a mindset, and straight away the mom was like, no, like, this is the most he's ever participated. And she was almost crying, saying this to me, that, you know, he did a quarter of a session and he really enjoyed it. And obviously he didn't continue after that. But for them, that experience was actually really positive. So like, you just need to come at it, I guess, with the blank slate, and I guess get rid of your own expectations. The key to remember is that people with intellectual disability and autism can and do learn new skills and accomplish goals, but they just learn differently, and they need more time or sometimes more support to succeed. And it's also really important to remember that people with disability have some really unique strengths, and that we can really learn from if we take the time to do that. So yeah, look, I'm not going to get into it too much tonight in a short presentation. I'm going to check how I'm doing with time. Yeah, I only have about five minutes left. Say, we're not going to talk about the detailed characteristics of people with autism and intellectual disability, but just to talk about a few practical, inclusive coaching concepts and that we can all take on board. And if it helps someone to be included, it usually helps everyone in the session. So inclusive coaching is good for everyone, in my opinion. And so the first thing that I would encourage all domestic coaches to do, because you guys are the most important people in our pathway, in our club, and you're the first voice that a child is going to hear when they get involved with basketball. And I really believe that the best coaches should be coaching at the grassroots level, because that's where kids really have the most to learn. So individual athlete profiles are huge. This is just an example of one from an NDIS provider. But if you can, and you should do this for the whole team. So if you can really get everyone at the beginning of the season to fill out information about themselves, so what their own gifts and strengths are, and what works and what doesn't work for them, and tips to help them to learn, and you can understand that, that's going to set you up really, really well for your session. And so I'd highly encourage everyone to do that. Conscious that we're just a little bit short on time, so I might just run through this. But just remembering that all sessions should be what we call FISH. So fun, inclusive, safe, and high involvement. And what I mean by high involvement is that we don't really want to have long lines of people waiting. That's not going to be enjoyable for anyone, especially kids with autism or kids with intellectual disability. We want to try to always have, you know, a ball in everyone's hands if possible, and always have people moving and taking part in games, not standing around and trying to listen. So creating a really positive environment is really important, and using discrete coaching. So while the session is going on, if you notice that someone is struggling a little bit or needs extra support, bringing them aside and chatting to them without making it obvious to everyone else that you're having a chat with that person. And the other thing is using clear language and demonstrations. And for people with autism and people with intellectual disability, verbal instructions can really get mixed up. So if you can demonstrate what you're looking to have done, or if you can get a peer to demonstrate it, that's going to be the best way for them to really learn and understand what you're trying to do. Also important not to ever force participation. If it's too much for someone and they need to have a break, let them have a seat, let them relax, let them join in whenever they feel comfortable. But when they're doing that, we don't want to exclude them. So I would always give them a basketball and let them dribble on the sideline and let them mimic whatever is going on until they feel comfortable enough to join in. Also really engaging their parent or support person to be there during the session and to watch. And if there's something that the child doesn't want to join in, then maybe them and the parent can do it on the side until they feel like they have the skills and they want to participate. Game-centered approach is really important for people with intellectual disability. So finding a way to make instead of a drill, have it be a game. So small-sided games where they can really use their reasoning and really try to work on decision-making and skill execution. And then after you play the game and make some mistakes and learn maybe what works well and what doesn't, allowing time for reflection and to ask questions. But you should always be watching, asking and listening. If you don't know what works for someone in your session, don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to ask them what they may need extra help with, or what limitations they might have. And it's always better to ask than to assume. Just to talk quickly on the tree model. So that's always has a high focus on modifying everything that you do. So always modifying your teaching style, the rules, the equipment and the environment to best suit the needs of your participants. Really conscious that I'm kind of flying through this. Just to talk about autism, let me go back to this one. It's really important to remember that people with autism see the world differently, and they generally see details first, and then they build up to the big picture. So just to have a look at this playground here, someone, and again, this is a generalization, I guess, because everyone is an individual and people on the autism spectrum are affected differently. But in general, people on the autism spectrum, they see details first. So if they're looking at this photo of a playground, they may not realize straight away that it's a playground. They'll see the slide first, they'll see the steps, they'll see the little bike, and then they'll put all of those pieces together and say, oh, that's a playground. Whereas we would see the big picture first and then get down to the details. So I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. It's not that they're not able to pay attention. It's actually that they are paying attention to everything at once. And then it can be really hard to focus on one specific thing. So as long as you can try to make some modifications to help them to be able to, I guess, eliminate some of those environmental factors, that's really going to help that person to enjoy your session. So some things you can do, I'm just going to pick out some of the really important ones. You have to use clear demonstrations, and you have to allow time to process. You have to never use sarcasm or metaphors, because they will take everything that you're saying very literally. So one example I've had is just saying, like, pick up the pace. That really doesn't make sense when we actually think about it. So it's really important. You can ask someone to run faster, and then they will do their best usually to participate as best they can. You want to use a lot of people with autism have a hyper focus, and they can become really super focused on one special interest. So if you can find out what that is, you can use that as a strength, and then you can give them one specific task to achieve, so they're not trying to think about too much else that's going on, and they can really use that. For example, don't let a certain player get the ball. If defense is something they enjoy, and you give that clear instruction, you'll find they'll probably literally won't let that person get the ball. The other thing is just to talk quickly about stimming behaviors. People with autism, quite often, they will try to regulate their own body so they feel more comfortable. So they may, you may see stereotypical actions like flapping or moving, rocking from side to side. That's helping them to feel more comfortable. So I would never discourage that, but you can always discuss with them if their stimming behavior happens to maybe distract the rest of the session. You can always discuss with them and their parents ways that they can come up with that isn't going to distract the rest of the session. So for example, giving them a ball and letting them tap it from side to side within their hands, that's going to help them to be more regulated, and it's not going to disrupt the rest of the session. Really conscious that I just flew through all of that. All of this information is from specialolympics.com.au. I would highly encourage all of you to check out their website. They really are the leaders in this space for people with intellectual disability and autism participating in sport. There are some free online courses that you can do. Down here, I've just listed them: an introduction to autism spectrum disorder and improving sport for people with intellectual disability. And they're free, and they give some really great, like, practical examples of how to be a better coach. I think that these concepts are great for all coaching, not just for the cohort that we've talked about tonight. And they have a lot of these activity cards where it shows you small-sided games that you can use in your session, and I use those sessions that have been put together with Special Olympics and Sport Australia in all of my sessions, not just if I'm trying to include people and that we discussed tonight. That's it.
Jess?
Need to stop sharing, right? Yeah, there we go. Awesome.
Thanks so much for that. That was great. And I might try and get a copy of the stuff off you so we can send it out to everyone, because there was a lot of information in there and obviously a lot of time that went into that. And unfortunately, I don't allow enough time, obviously, for the coaches. So
sorry for so much information, but it's so good to run through it all. And apologies for rushing as well, guys, if it was a bit too quick.
Yeah, I think they would have got a lot out of it regardless, and at least we'll start some thought-provoking things, and then we can point them in the right direction. I've got 2 questions. I'm going to get the questioners to ask. Apologies if I say your name wrong. I think it's Hannah first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I just have one question. How do you find the balance between including someone with a sensory social disability and keeping the team coaching flowing so that the others don't get too disadvantaged skills and time-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the hardest, I guess, challenge that we all have. And I think it's the biggest thing is to have a very good plan. So if you can have a clear session plan, and you know exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve in the session, and also if you have a set structure of your session. So say, for example, if you always do a specific warm-up, if you always do a specific shooting drill, passing drill, what you can then do once everyone knows what your normal sort of routine for your session is and you have a clear visual schedule, you can then modify within those drills to meet the needs of whoever is participating. So for example, if everyone knows, okay, we always do partner passing, for example, you can pair people up based on their individual ability. So if you have, maybe really advanced players, you can have them doing that drill with 2 balls. And then if you need to make it a little bit easier for someone who does have additional needs, you can do that within the same context of the one game or drill. But it is a really hard challenge. So I would definitely recommend checking out those SOA activity cards, because they show you games that it's sort of the one structure or game for everyone, but then there's ways you can add difficulty or make something easier based on who needs help, if that makes sense.
All good. Perfect. Thanks for that. Next one is the Victorian wheelchair state coach, assistant coach, Jason Bryant.
You could be giving this session.
You really didn't need to say that part, Reece. Thanks, Jess. That was really good, actually. Working with wheelchair, I think there's a lot of stuff in that sort of resonated with me. More generally, I guess, I was just wondering, with kids that might be coming to, say, mainstream basketball that don't, say, fit into all abilities, as in they can play mainstream, but they do have some sort of challenge. I've found in the past with some of the kids I've sort of had experience with domestic, there's still a fair barrier to entry, or a sort of concern, I guess, from parents primarily around how they might fit into a group like that. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on ways we could sort of try and lower that barrier, I guess.
Yeah, it's really tough because I think it comes down to each individual situation. I think the biggest thing is building that relationship with the parents and with the child. Everyone's going to be comfortable to different extents discussing their who they are and discussing their disability and sort of owning it as their identity. So I think you need to find where that individual and their family fit in that. But just from speaking to different people who do have intellectual disability and autism, I think when you really like self-identify with that, that's really empowering, and then you can sort of use that to, like, people, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is people need to have their own voice. You know, if we're trying to build a session that is that's inclusive to people with autism, for example, we need to ask people with autism, you know, how do we do that? So giving them a voice. But that's really challenging with young kids because it really depends on the individual where they're at with that. And but I think the key is with the whole session, whether you're speaking with that individual with additional needs or not, it's speaking to the whole session and just I guess acknowledging that everyone's different, right? And everyone has individual needs and everyone's going to work better in certain situations. So, you know, we all have that in common, I guess, and we need to support each other to find our own strengths. That's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's
no, it's good. I'm sure it's a thing we could talk about for like 3 hours non-stop.
Yeah.
So no, that was good. Great, thanks.
I think that's right. If we broke this down into all different sections, it could go forever. So really good, Jess. Really appreciate your time. Like I said, I know how much work goes into the presentations, and the coaches that have logged in and the coaches that watch it back later will get a real lot out of it. So thank you so much again.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No worries. I'll now throw over to our second presenter, which is Corey Michailidis. He's presenting on game day coaching tips. He obviously is good at coaching games because he won 2 champ women finals last year when I was away. So I'm got my notepad out, mate, and ready to learn from the master.
All good. Can you guys hear me all right? Is the audio coming through good? Great. All right. I'll just share my screen. Bear with me. There we are. Share. Move this top bar. There we are. All right. That coming through all good?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. So, as Reece said, my name's Corey. Thanks to you all for tuning in. So, I'm going to talk about game day coaching tips and advice. Oh, you're not letting me do that. There we go. So, just a quick overview of how it's going to go. I'll start with an incredibly brief introduction of me. Then I'll get onto the aims of domestic coaching. I'll go through my various tips and advice. We'll then sort of summarize it all before getting into the Q&A. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to give you the, the secret game-winning play or whatnot. Leave that for Mason next week if you tune into his offensive stuff. But I'm going to keep it really simple because I think ultimately, particularly as domestic coaches, I think that's what we're all striving to achieve, keeping it as simple as possible, making it as translatable as possible to our athletes. So as I said, it will be pretty straightforward. But if you've got any questions on what I'm saying, both sort of specifically addressing my points or maybe a little bit higher level, feel free to fire them through to Reece and I will tackle them at the end. So very briefly, I began coaching domestic about 8 years ago in 2012 while still playing rep out in Sunbury. I was coaching 10s and 12s. And then I eventually took my first VJBL Friday night team in 2016 out in Nunawading. I had the 12-5 boys, which for any rep coaches here, you'll know that's effectively domestic. And was also at the same time coaching under 10 boys briefly. And then I moved out to Werribee, at least to coach, not to live, but I moved out there to coach, and I currently now have the 16-1 girls, and I also assist Reece in the Big V Championship women. So I think this presentation is really important and something that I can reflect on quite strongly, because in the bottom left there, that photo is me with my 12-5 boys a few years ago. And, now I've come a fairly long way in a relatively short amount of time. That's the champ women with the group there. So I've been fortunate to sort of have some good opportunities to make some good coaching connections. But the real challenge for me throughout all this sort of rising, I guess, in the lower ranks in such a short time is just trying to master the simplicity of coaching. So hopefully I can convey that tonight. So I think before we get into any tips and advice, I think it's really important to just reflect very briefly on what we're doing here as domestic coaches, what our aims are. And I think Jess touched on it perfectly, and I know some of the other presentations in previous weeks have as well. But I think, we're trying to create an environment that sparks, and I think in this order, I think first of all, we want to create an environment that sparks joy. So we want the kids to find a love for the game, right? So it's not directly sort of correlated, but I guess a lot of studies suggest that long-term passion and ambition in their pathway, it's generally facilitated by joyful experiences and memories at a young age. So I think most importantly, we do want to keep it light and upbeat. But as coaches, we also want our athletes to work hard, right? So we do want to fuel that desire to work hard and improve and make that grind fun. And then at the same time, we're about development. We're building basic understanding and motor skills. We're keeping it easy, ball handling, finishing, basic shooting, basic concepts. And that ultimately helps develop our athletes, both for domestic, but also, further development for higher levels, VJBL, other sporting interests as well. And I won't go down that tangent, but I will say just very succinctly that multi-sport athletes have to be the way to go at a young age. We don't worry about specialization. Let them sort of reach out, and that's crucial. But anyway, going on to the first tip, cutting down on the talk. And this might be the most important one, and it's certainly the one that I've had the biggest issue with. Keeping it succinct. Reece likes to say, talk in bullet points. And I think that's so vital. So looking on game day, pre-game, the game before yours has ended, we're all getting set up to go. You're calling your players in pre-game. I think personally, one good bit of advice, sit the starters down on the bench. So if you know your 5, name them, get them to sit down on the bench in front of you, and then have the bench behind you form a tight huddle. Keeps it close. Everyone's focus is on you. We're blocking out distractions, which will be a big theme as you'll see throughout. You see there, less is more. 2 talking points max. Beyond that, players are getting distracted. Just keep it simple, 2 points, that's all. And keep it light and positive, as I mentioned before. So, I'm a big believer that games are the reward for their hard work at practice. We're not slugging along at practice so that we can win this weekend game. Maybe when we come finals, we all want to win, but for the most part, we're here just to develop. And, games are the chance to, I guess, almost celebrate and implement the things that we've sort of learned in practice. So you'll see above where I've said 2 talking points max. One way I like to do that, and you'll see the image down below, I've just screenshot one of my VGBL training plans, and I've got highlighted there 2 goals that we have for a training session. So just for this example, offensively, to push the ball in transition, so running fast and looking to throw the ball ahead for easy scores. And defensively, just keeping the ball in front of you, staying in front, not letting the offense blow by you. I think, just something as simple as that. You've got 2 points, 1 offensive, 1 defensive, and they can frame sort of your goals for the game. And then you can evaluate those throughout. So tip 2, make sure the warm-up warms them up. So domestic stretching or foam rolling, I think you probably should. And it's a big ask. I'm not going to lie. There have been many times in previous seasons where I've disregarded it. But I just think it's so important to manage athlete well-being. Core Advantage, the strength and conditioning group for Basketball Victoria, they have a great warm-up program. I've linked it in the show notes or in the PowerPoint notes. So when that gets sent out, feel free to click the link and have a look at that. That is quite long, especially for domestic, but you can do an abridged version or just something to make sure that the athletes are rolling, stretching, activating, looking after their bodies. And then when it comes to the warm-up, I think we're trying to activate, in a sense, where we can, both the body and the mind. So, we need a decent pace, get the blood flowing, get the athletes working, getting ready for the game, but also where we can and where we have the time, making it a game-like warm-up. So as you can see, I've got there, inserting some decision-making where able. So, for example, here, I know a lot of you guys may already have some warm-ups down, but something really easy, just you might have your normal layup drill. Make it a 2-pass layup drill or 1 pass and then a light contest, just to get the athletes engaging mentally, thinking about what they're doing. And if you're in a circumstance where you have more than, say, 2 minutes to warm up, I know the gripe of all domestic coaches is we always have 2 minutes. The game before us is running late and we don't have time. But where you do have time, adding something in against defense, I think, is really good and something I've really valued through my coaching. So you'll see the right diagram here. Just a simple 3v2, 3 offense, 2 defense. Just make it 2-pass limit or, 1 shot only. Get through it quickly, but it gets them playing against defense, more game-like in your warm-up. So tip 3, and I'll get through this quickly, but you have a front row seat, so make the most of it. It's the ultimate debate of whether you're a standing or sitting coach. I'm a standing coach and I'm trying to change it, but I think there are real benefits of sitting down to coach. For one, as you'll see, you see more of the game. You're not riding every play, stalking the sideline from half-court line to baseline like I tend to do. You're also less likely to get chatty with the refs, which I'll deal with as a separate point later, but it's there. And also, you're better positioned to engage with the bench, right? We're trying to spark joy and development, and part of development is learning through observing and teaching through observing. So staying connected on the bench right next to your players. When you see things, you can talk to your players. They can observe, hear your comments, and go from there. And just to very quickly illustrate that, as I mentioned, I'm a head coach and an assistant coach right now. And I can tell you, when I assist Reece and the Champ women, I can virtually memorize the last however many plays, perfectly. But when I'm a head coach and you ask me how my game went on a Friday night, I really struggle to remember the specifics because I'm so invested in writing the play. So if we can just sort of step back, remove yourselves from the immediacy of it, sit with your team, I think it puts you in a much better position to observe, teach, and really analyze what's going on. All right. Tip number 4, managing subs and the bench. So this is a big gripe with me when I see domestic teams and matches. Organize your bench. So sit down yourself closest to the score bench and then have your players on the bench sitting next to you. From there, they should have their bottles with them. They should have their bags under the seat or behind them, away from parents, as you'll see. I'll get to in a minute. We want to keep the players up near the coach, sitting down, not on the floor, not standing up, running around, just sitting nicely, paying attention, commenting, cheering, etc. Without any need to leave the bench for distractions. They should only be leaving if they're standing up to cheer or high five or if they're going on the court. Now, about subs. As you'll see, I've got there, this isn't the NBA. Keep your subs regular and even. We can debate the development versus winning, till the cows come home. But I think really you can achieve both. You just need to think about how you manage your subs. But I think it's really important that when it comes to developing athletes, you need to give athletes the opportunity to implement their training skills in game with live pressure decision-making against unpredictable defense. And if they don't get a chance to play in game, they're simply never going to get that level of development. And I know this might be common knowledge or, of course, to some of you guys, but I think it's just really important to emphasize that. And this is my 16-1 girls here on the right. And I love thinking about this as an example. There's a player in my team who last year played in a lower team, didn't play a whole of a lot throughout the VGBL season. And we ultimately decided that she should make my team in the end. And she worked incredibly hard at all the trainings throughout. She was showing real improvement, and partly through injuries, but also partly through her effort at training. She actually ended up starting for us, for my ones team, for virtually the entirety of grading and did really, really good things. And I think the message to take away from that is, 1, you need to actually give your players the opportunity, but 2, players will play differently for different coaches, different age. They might mature a little bit and all of a sudden they're a different person to what they were 6-12 months ago. Like, you need to give your players the opportunity. Next, when a player subs off, have them sit at the end of the bench furthest from you. This is just a little tip that you don't have to do, but I think it's really a really neat strategy to, if you're sort of someone who struggles with, how do I get each of my players playing roughly 20 minutes, 18 minutes, whatnot. And we're just trying to worry about getting the players in evenly. Once they come off, everyone give their high fives, then go sit at the end of the bench. And then, the players sitting closest to you are next to go in. And on that note, on subs, and this is a massive one for me, and it has been for the last few years, get your entire team standing up on high fives as your sub comes off. So when they walk off, it's just so much better when all your teammates are standing up, their high fives, paying attention, cheering, praising. And on this point as well, this is also a perfect opportunity for the coach to praise and give constructive feedback, right? Don't just say good job and send them away. This is a learning opportunity. So make sure we build that. All right. Tip number 5, the perfect timeout / halftime talk. So I'll get you guys to turn your mind back to tip number 1 regarding cutting down the talk. So you'll have 60 seconds for your timeout. Use it wisely. It is a lot of time. So I'll draw your attention to my little timeout formula on the right. So you've got 60 seconds. As your players come in, for example, give yourself 15 seconds to think of 2 points. And during this time, I really encourage you to empower your players to talk amongst themselves here. You might have some natural leaders that are starting to stand out and be more assertive and vocal and supportive. This is a great opportunity for them to sort of get everyone focused. If you don't have that, encourage your players generally, to start speaking up, maybe get different voices going. So once you've thought of your points in that 15 seconds, then as you come in, you've got another 15 seconds to make your subs. Then that leaves you with 30 seconds to succinctly deliver 2 points. There are a couple of ways you can do this, as you'll see on my PowerPoint here. You might decide to approach it with a keep plus add method. So our first point might be something we're doing exceptionally well. Keep doing this, keep running hard in transition. You guys are working really hard. And then now we might have an add. So now let's start running back on defense after our shot. You might decide to just have one offensive, one defensive focus. But if we stick to this method, you can clearly see here, it's a very simple way to compartmentalize it, limit the amount of time talking, and we're ready to send our players back out to dominate. And the one caveat I have here that I'll flag is if you finish speaking early, send them back out early. This is one I really struggle with, but if you have your 2 points and you've said them in 20 seconds, there's no point talking to them for 40 seconds because you're just going to flood them with further distractions. They're going to stop listening. They're not only going to hear your subsequent points, but they're also going to forget about your first 2. They're going to start looking at what their little brother further down the bench is doing on his phone or whatever, right? They're going to start counting lights, as we might say. But yeah, really important, succinct, send them back out ready to go. Where are we? Okay. Tip number 6, the best coaches are good managers. Managing in all different manners, as you can see here. To begin, managing the refs. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because I'm pretty set in my ways with this, despite struggling with it at times. But minimal interaction, especially at domestic, and keeping it positive in your interactions. There should be very little questioning, certainly no abusing, certainly no cracking it and screaming and throwing tantrums. It's got to be positive. Another quote from Reece that I've taken from my time with the Champ Women is to control the controllables. There's only so much in your control, and everything outside your control, it's a futile effort to focus on that. So control what you as a coach, you as a team, a playing unit can control. And as I've got there, you set the standards for your players. There's nothing worse as a coach, as a spectator, to see a kid miss a shot or a layup or get scored on, and then they're cracking it and throwing their hands everywhere because they think they were hard done by or the ref stuffed up. Like, there's nothing worse. It's embarrassing. You feel bad when you do it yourself as a coach. So set the standard for your players. Lead by example. Players here, balancing their emotions. So you almost want to be the stabilizer to stop players from getting carried away at either end. So when they're upbeat, remain grounded. Don't get carried away. Keep them humble. And vice versa. When they're flat, bring a bit of energy. That doesn't mean yelling at the refs or carrying on too much, but it just means giving them a bit of a pep talk. You might be a little bit more vocal when your player does something really good, just to bring the energy up a little bit. Just on this, I think back to one really pertinent example for me. It's so pertinent because it was the last game I coached before COVID. At the end of our grading phase, we had a match against La Trobe, and this was to get into VC, which is, for those who aren't familiar with rep, it's the highest level in a junior age group. And I remember I was so anxious about it, and I felt like it was the most important thing ever. It was the one of the peaks of my young coaching career, and I carried on like an absolute lunatic. I was so negative, every little stuff up. I was almost berating my players on the bench, even, who weren't the ones doing anything wrong. And I sit back now, I've been greatly humbled because of COVID, and I haven't had to coach. And I sit there and I think, I was an idiot. I would hate to think what the parents in the stands were thinking. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. And just with parents here, kill any negativity early. I don't know if you domestic coaches, you guys choose to have team meetings. I think it's always a good idea at the start of the season, even just a brief one at domestic level. But just making sure the standard is the parents are cheering and keeping things positive, or they're not saying anything at all. No criticism, no calling out the refs, no calling out players, no calling out coaches, keeping it really positive and upbeat, because we want to foster those joyful memories. And I'll just direct your attention to my two images here on the side. So for those who aren't familiar, this is Doc Rivers, coaching legend, current coach of the LA Clippers. The top there, Doc is one of the best relationship coaches in the NBA today. And the top there is him embracing one of his guards. I think this was after they had a playoff loss. It shows the sort of the emotion, the care you want to have for your players. But at the same time, if you look at the image below, it shows we're all fallible. Doc is probably the whiniest coach in the NBA, and you'll see him there. That's him losing his mind at the NBA referees. I think he got ejected here. So the message I want to sort of convey here is that we want to be top Doc, happy Doc. We don't want to have any of this negative, angry Doc, keeping it real positive. Now, end of the game. So game's wrapped up. We've run all our master plays or kept the kids positive, and we've had a great win, or maybe we've had a tough defeat. But the tip here is just let the kids go home already. Post game, keep it quick praise, and then debrief. Here, keep this very succinct. Once again, as I said at the start, cut down on the talk, and put it back on the players here. So, ideally, I know Jackie in previous DCEC spoke about, your training sessions. Hopefully by this point you've had goals for your training sessions, goals for your seasonal development. We can refer back to these and say, well, what did we do well today? What could we improve? And how did we go with our aims for the game? And put it back on them. And I know in my experience, this doesn't necessarily always invite a heap of responses. In fact, a lot of the time we met with silence, and this might be frustrating as a coach, but just sparking that desire and that willingness to think critically about your actions, your teammates' actions. It just helps players develop the intellectual understanding of the game, and that, is massive in further in the development. And my last bonus tip, ask other coaches to watch you and give you feedback. I think this is so crucial. Simple one here. I didn't have enough time in this session to fill my slides with all the coaches that have, helped me along the way. But just speaking to the two immediate ones here, Reece on the left, assisting him with the champ women, him being the player and coach development manager, and him being annoyed many a times by my messages asking to come down and watch my VJBL coaching. But always been great with feedback. And as I mentioned, cutting down the talk and being succinct and talking in bullet points is a big one that I've had to work on. As you can see, I've still got a way to come with it, but he's always been good at sort of, putting me on that direction. And now we've got Mason on the right. Helpful that my best mate is also the girls coaching lead, so he gets paid to watch me coach. But massive in terms of giving me advice, being able to turn it into questions. And I think I didn't add it here, but I think very specifically, asking other coaches to watch and give you critical, blunt, honest feedback. For those who are coaching in the Wyndham area, you're fortunate that most, if not all the clubs have excellent coaches, long tenured domestic coaches, competent and tenured rep coaches. So turn to coaches who will give you honest feedback. Because at the end of the day, we're in it for the kids. We're not in it for ourselves. So, if you can't, put in the effort to sort of reflect harshly and develop in this sense, we're doing them the injustice. It's not for our egos. Right. So my summary, if you take anything away from this rambly presentation, take these points. So first of all, everything you do should be there to spark joy and development. And I think personally in that order. Second, there are many distractions in basketball. There are many distractions in life, but in a basketball setting, there are, parents, kids, referees, whatever, right? The goal as a coach is to minimize them. And I think the best way to do that is through the next point. When it comes to talking, less really is more. Next, referees don't have to be your friends, but don't make them enemies, right? We're setting the standard for our players, right? Don't engage, be polite, be positive, be constructive, and demonstrate that mark of respect that we expect from our players and our players' parents. And lastly, be a student, learn from others, seek feedback, right? Do the little things to help advance our players. All right. Look, that's all for me in terms of the PowerPoint. So I thank you all for tuning in. It's been great to see the turnout, especially given a public holiday. We'll get into the Q&A, but I mean, after that, if you have any further questions that perhaps don't get addressed here or something you think of later, feel free to reach out. My details will be on the PowerPoint, so I'll leave them there. But I guess without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and maybe I'll hand it over to Reece to go from there.
Thanks, mate. Good job. Very good. Liked it a lot. I think coaches get a lot out of that. So 2 questions. The first one's from a coach that has had to drop off, so I'll ask it for them. But you spoke about in-game not trying to coach standing up too much. What about how much do you coach live in the game? Are you using a lot of verbal cues? Are you shouting from the sideline, or are you more just using those timeouts and things, or talking to the players on the bench? How do you approach it and recommend coaches at domestic level should go about it?
Yep, that's a great question. I think, and I know some of the other coaches have touched on this in previous coach education clinics. I think before we even talk about how we communicate in game, I think it's really important to establish your own language of communication in our training sessions, you know, leading up to games, trying to make things as succinct as possible. And we don't have to overcomplicate it, but certainly having those succinct, simple cues definitely make for in-game communication to be a lot easier and clearer. In terms of how much, I mean, there's no real set limit. Personally, the way I like to try and do it on a good day when I'm not forgetting about all these wonderful tips I've shared, I guess the way I like to do it is ideally try sitting down, getting most of your communication through your bench so that they can then sort of impact that as they come on. If there's something urgent you want to say to a player while they're on the court and you just don't think it's an opportune moment to sub them out or whatnot, definitely at a dead ball, if you've got that clear, succinct language, you know, getting a hold of them. If the opposition team or a team shooting free throws, you know, maybe call them over and just quickly chat to them for 10 seconds on the sideline. But once again, I think the key message here is to be very clear and prioritizing what exactly you want to say. You know, if you have lots of different things you want to go on about, maybe save it for the sub and just focus on the one key thing you need to get through to them right here, right now. Yeah,
no, it's a great point. And it is hard in those games to actually coach from the sideline. You know, there's so much going on during a big V game, let alone a domestic game where there's 8 other courts and things like that going on, whistles and people shouting. So probably wise to pick and choose when you actually communicate clearly, like you said, Corey.
Can I just add on that as well? There's a good chance, as you mentioned, with all the distractions, there's a good chance that in the flurry of a game, if you call a player over and try and say something, or you just try and shout it across the court, there's a good chance they, A, probably aren't going to hear it, and B, if they do hear it, it's probably not going to register. So this is where I think it's probably just better to convey this information through your bench, get the information through to sort of a greater number of players, and then you can sort of selectively talk with them as they come out.
Yeah. Got one question from an up-and-coming coach. He's got a better haircut than you, though. It's Mason.
Thanks, Coach. Fantastic presentation, Corey and Jess, as well. Thanks for tonight. A coach that I've been fortunate enough to meet, who coaches in the Werribee domestic, she's reached out to me asking how she handles parents who are, you know, very vocal before and after game situations. Both in terms of like, is the coach doing the best thing for their daughter, and it's getting, you know, hard for her to handle. I was wondering if you had any advice on that behalf.
No, great question. I need to get something out of the way. I'm not accepting that he has a better haircut than me, but moving on. So quite a loaded question. I think one thing, I guess if we take it back to the start of the season, I think it's really important, as I said, to, if we can, have a team meeting and set the ground rules early. We want to nip that in the bud as early as possible. But naturally, that's not always going to just sort of dispel of, you know, qualms and issues that parents might raise. Personally, a really good method that I have that I actually got from, I think it was you, is to not talking to parents on game night or game day. It's always in the heat of emotion. So for those who coach on a Saturday, for example, don't talk to parents about court time or related issues or any such concerns. Don't talk to them about that before the game, during the game, after the game, whatever. Save it for training, save it for a phone call the next day. That gives, parents a time to remove the emotion from the situation. You're probably going to be able to foster a more logical and sort of analytical conversation rather than just being fueled by negative emotions and probably some harsh words. So that would be my tip about when to address it. And then in terms of how you address it, I think it's just a matter of remaining empathetic, demonstrating listening, and showing that you're understanding what they're saying and understanding their perspective. But at the same time, I think it's really important to not compromise on your values, and that might mean a tough conversation. And I can tell you that's something that I definitely need to get better at, is having tough conversations. But at the same time, I just think it's so important to hold true to your values and not compromise on those for the sake of avoiding confrontation.
Thank you, Coach.
Good answer. And if you do what you said, Corey, at the start, where you possibly outline those expectations at the start of the season at a training or, before your first game, hopefully that's a reference point that you can refer back to and remind the parents that it was pretty clear from the start what you sort of expected. So,
sorry, just one thing I'll add as well, and I'm jumping all over the place now, but you've got me rolling, so I might as well keep going. One thing I will say is if you're not feeling super up for doing a team meeting or whatnot, just as equally, you can create almost like an expectation sheet or effectively almost like a culture document setting out the expectations, and you can just email that out to the parents before the start of the season. Make sure that they all come back and acknowledge and agree to what's in there. It doesn't have to be a big roundtable discussion, but just something to convey that, this behavior just won't be acceptable or this behavior is expected.
Terrific. Thanks, Corey. Thanks for those detailed answers. And thanks for your presentation. Both Corey and Jess, obviously a lot of time goes into it. To the coaches that tuned in, thank you for tuning in. For the 55th time, we'll mention it's a public holiday. But can you please share the presentation or go online tonight or tomorrow with coaches in your club, because I think really valuable stuff tonight from both, and I'll get those resources out. And next week, Mason and Kyle are presenting. So the Master and the Apprentice. So it'll be a good week. So make sure you check it out.